This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Another fun marathon weekend. Lot of stuff to cover on the show today, including a WWE Premium Live special. I don't really know if I could say it was premium or special. I was barely live to watch it. My body was in the room. I don't know if my brain was by the time we got to the main event. Oh, God. I'll save that conversation for later on in the show. You are in for quite the bumpy ride. But you all know what time it is. If you've been following the show for a while, it is the FSWR Monday edition. We got Retro Raw to talk about today. We got the AEW Collision show from over the weekend, both of which were shows that just kind of existed. And then there was SummerSlam, which I watched on Saturday night. At least I started watching it on Saturday. It still may be going on right now. But since we're already in for a relatively long show, I need to savor my energy where I can. You all know me, I'm just a bundle of vitality on these podcasts. People often tell me, you're too energetic. You gotta tone it down a little bit. Yeah, they're probably right. But where's the fun in that? You gotta give the people what they want. And that's me screaming into a microphone talking about how bad a lot of this wrestling content is. Well, luckily for you, you're in for Retro Raw. So let's dive into the Raw program. And we'll just go ahead and ignore whatever the hell that intro was, where they had surgeons halting an operation on a patient so that they could turn on the TV to watch Monday Night Raw. And I guess we're to presume the patient dies, because it was apparently more important to watch Monday Night Raw in 1994. Hopefully that's not a recurring video package. Yeah. Can you imagine a scenario in which an open heart operation is put on hold because doctors needed to see what was happening on WWF television in 1994? I can simplify that with two words. Absolutely nothing. No, at least absolutely nothing good. Unfortunately, we were kind of back to our normal state of affairs this week. They threw us a bone last time by giving us a relatively decent Retro Raw for a change. This time the story was much different. And the horror began right at the top of the program with the bogus Undertaker versus Butch Banks. Can't remember what Vince was calling him. The Imposter Taker was thrown around a time or two. I wrote down in my notes, don't call him Primetime Brian Lee Undertaker. And it's one of those things, and I've talked about this before with the whole fake Undertaker storyline. How you look back at it years after the fact, and you realize just how phony and stupid the whole thing was. The idea that people actually bought this was the real Undertaker It's so absurd. And meanwhile, Vince and Macho Man have to sit there on commentary and completely ignore all the different facial features, the fact that Bryan did not move or work like Mark at all, the fact that he was like 3 or 4 inches shorter than Mark. I don't know. The whole thing was just dumb. I did kind of laugh as Vince was hyping up the Taker versus Taker match for SummerSlam. He's also letting us know that this will be a one-time blow-off and we will never see the match again. Probably the best booking decision Vince ever made. Hey Vince, you think we ought to maybe consider rematching The Undertaker versus Undertaker at some point? Could draw us a lot of money. Oh, let's not push our luck, pal. No, even Vince was seeing the signs. This is where he stepped in as a promoter and said, maybe we just do it one time. And it was a good call. So this all about sucked. It was Brian Lee beating up a job guy for 3 minutes, doing absolutely terrible Undertaker impressions, and then beating him with a chokeslam. The crowd was so quiet you could hear mice pissing in the rafters. Probably a good indication this phony Undertaker storyline wasn't getting over. So again, probably a wise move that they canned it after the SummerSlam debacle. You know what else wasn't over? Was Leslie Nielsen being hired to uncover the mystery of The Undertaker. But I did learn one thing in that 20-second pre-tape. Green screens have come a long way since the 90s. So, well, I was going to continue my line of jokes about things that weren't over at this point. But with the VTR they aired with Shawn Michaels interviewing Lex Luger on his Heartbreak Hotel segment the previous weekend, Shawn actually did a pretty good job working the Dick Tracy role. He actually would have made for a good legal attorney if he was representing a defendant. Asking Luger if he was denying the idea that he and DiBiase had met in person to negotiate contracts. And right when Luger goes, well, of course we met, Shawn cuts him off and goes, aha, I got him now. And then he goes, and is it true that DiBiase offered you a lucrative deal? As Luger goes, well, yeah, he offered me a lucrative deal. Shawn again cuts him off and goes, aha, I knew it. I never underestimate Shawn's ability to work the sleazy scumbag role. Whether he's working or shooting in that role, he's great at being a condescending douchebag. The Heartbreak Hotel thing I still thought was kind of stupid. It's the fucking leg lamp. Just can't take it seriously. Now, I actually thought they were going to use that segment to build up to a Luger versus Shawn match on Raw, which probably could have been a lot of fun. No, instead, they had a better idea. They sent Luger out to wrestle Chad Miller. I would call that a significant downgrade. Still trying to advance the DiBiase story. They had him confront Luger in the aisleway and wave a wad of cash in front of him. But Luger is still remaining neutral, even though he did sort of give DiBiase a nod of approval right before he left. I think that was more so Luger just telling him to go fuck off and let him go work his match. As if Luger needed to avoid any distractions to beat a geek like Chad Miller. He won with a running forearm in about 2 minutes. Then we had a SummerSlam card update with Todd, which had to have gone on for like a half hour. The literal definition of a never-ending segment. Now, they had thrown a couple highlight packages in there. But seriously, I left the room to go do something, when I came back in about 2 minutes later, this dude was still running down SummerSlam matches. I'm like, can we find some middle ground, please? There's the AEW problem where they run down like 67 matches in about 15 seconds, and you can't follow any of it. And then there's the WWF problem circa 1994, where Todd Pettingill is on camera doing a thorough insider baseball breakdown of every match on the card, including the fucking girls' match. What a paycheck that guy had. Whatever happened to Todd Pettingill? You don't hear many people talk about him anymore, but holy shit. That guy was front and center on like every episode of Raw in the mid-90s. You know, Vince had quite the man crush on him. I don't know why. Look at him. Speaking of guys that were front and center on this show, Ted DiBiase. God, he was out there for like virtually every segment. I'm trying to count. Okay, so he was out there for the Brian Lee squash. That was in the opener. Then he's out there with Luger for a few seconds. They had a pre-tape they aired during the Luger match where DiBiase was cutting a promo. Now he's back here for a tag match with IRS and Bam Bam Bigelow versus Doink and Tatanka. Now, first and foremost, poor Tatanka. Had to get that out of the way. Second off, they may as well have just called this show Raw is Ted. Probably could have just put him on commentary, to be honest. So anyway, they're doing this match. It's boring. Not bad, just really not all that exciting. The heels worked over Tatanka for about an hour. They end up doing a double collision spot with him and Bam Bam right before the hot tag to Doink. Good Lord. And, well, basically here's the finish. Tatanka argued with the official, which allowed Bam Bam to cut off Doink with an enziguri to the back of the head. And then IRS just hit the lariat for the pin. So the story by the end, Tatanka ran his own distraction spot and cost his team the match because, well, he's an idiot. Was Tatanka secretly in cahoots with the heels? I'm not even joking. Maybe that's the idea. I really don't know. I barely remember jack shit about the $1 Million Corporation storyline, much less the various team members that were associated with it throughout its 2-year existence. But man, now that I think of it, the whole build to Luger versus Tatanka, like how they're pushing so hard into getting you to buy the notion that Luger's the one that sold out for DiBiase, I'm thinking Tatanka might be the one to eventually flip. Because he's sort of been lurking in the backdrop, but no one's really questioning his motives. So maybe it is Tatanka that's secretly in cahoots with the corporation. Or maybe that's just my natural instincts kicking in and I'm looking way too much into it. I mean, without me going into spoilers and reading ahead, which at this point I kind of want to see what happens because I really don't remember anything about the Luger-Tatanka program. The only things I remember about SummerSlam 94 were the Taker versus Taker match, which sucked, and the cage match with Owen and Brett. I think I vaguely remember some of the particulars with Razor and Diesel, but now I'm kind of intrigued to see if I get proven right. That Tatanka's the one that ends up turning and joining the heels. Boy, what a swerve that would be. It'd be the most relevant thing Tatanka's done since they jobbed him out to Ludwig Borga. So from there, we come back for a King's Court segment. And this time we did not have Jerry Lawler badgering future wedded couples in the crowd. I think they may have cut the cord on that after last week, realizing how uncanny a lot of it was. Now, this time we were back to our normally scheduled King's Court, and it's Owen and the Anvil out as the featured guests. And Owen's out there running down Brett, talking about all the days they spent in the dungeon training, and how Brett spent so many years bullying and berating him, how it motivated Owen to get bigger, stronger, faster, to the point where he had Brett running to daddy because he was scared of Owen. Owen's so fucking great. I love him. He even threw in that subtle dig, talking about how he wishes Neidhart could be his real big brother, since he's the only Hart family member Owen can trust. And then, of course, a minute later, in the same breath, he winds up contradicting himself, because after they run down the footage of Owen winning at WrestleMania 10, him becoming the King of the Ring back in May, then Owen starts talking about how all the family members are now on his side. They were in Brett's corner, but now the coin is flipped. Meanwhile, I'm like, dude, you literally just said the Anvil is the only family member you can trust, while at the same time saying that all the Hart family members are on your side. Such a prick. What a fucking liar. And, while he's running down Brett and calling him a loser, Jerry interrupts and talks about how he has another special guest for this evening, what he considers the runt of the litter in the Hart family. So here comes Bruce Hart to share his opinion on the whole charade. And, well, far be it for me to stake the claim that somebody may have outshined Owen Hart in this promo, but Bruce Hart gave him a run for his money. He's out there badgering Owen, screaming at him, cutting the fucking promo of the century, telling him he's a disgrace to the Hart family. You know, he sold out at Survivor Series last year. He cheated at WrestleMania. And then he brought in this, quote, big, flat-topped, moronic geek to help him win the King of the Ring. I cannot tell you how hard I laughed as Bruce Hart referred to Jim the Anvil Neidhart as big, flat-topped, moronic geek. It's like he was trying to subconsciously run down every adjective he could think of off the top of his head. These were the words that he could best come up with. Big, flat-topped, moronic, and geek. Couldn't even call him an oaf. He had to use the word geek. And then he kept going. And the promo segment got 10 times better, telling Owen that he's going to be locked inside that cage with Brett at SummerSlam, crying like a big crybaby, sitting there crying. And he ain't going to have this big moron out there to save his butt. Ugh. This is awesome. So awesome. This may have been the best promo anybody's cut in the WWF since Owen's infamous I kicked your leg out of your leg promo. Bruce fucking Hart, of all people. This should have gone another 15 minutes. This would have been the highlight of 1994 in wrestling. Bruce Hart, being the MVP of the Monday Night Raw show, cutting fiery babyface promos on Owen and Neidhart for selling out. What a Dynamite segment. It almost made the show worthwhile. Almost being the operative word. And then for our TV main event, Bob Backlund wrestled Kevin Kruger, even though I'm pretty sure Vince referred to him as Tom Kruger at various points. Maybe I was just hearing things. And again, this is crazy off his rocker Bob Backlund, who decided to turn into an insane old man at the drop of a hat. He's like the World War II veteran grandfather when Drake and Josh had beat the shit out of the two nerds. During this 3-minute match, Backlund proceeded to get a boring chant thrown at him, as well as "We want Brett" chants. And think about that for a minute. Think about the time period we're in. Think about how hard you have to try back in 1994 to get WWF fans to chant "boring" during one of your matches. This was still pre-internet age, when all the marks were showing up and buying tickets. It's almost unheard of. WWF fans in the early to mid-90s chanting "boring" on live TV shows. And to be fair, it was kind of dull. Backlund did some amateur takedowns for a little bit, snapped at the crowd a few times, and then finally tapped the guy out with a chicken wing. And the crowd still didn't seem to care. Bear in mind, this guy is about to have a very short-lived WWF title run. In like 2 or 3 months. This is the guy that winds up beating Brett for the belt and then passing it off to Diesel. That'll be an interesting discussion to have when we get to November. And then right before they went to sign off, they cut to an angle in the locker room where Luger broke in to talk with DiBiase. And right as Luger's jaw-jacking with Nikolai Volkov, here comes Tatanka to yet again call Luger a turncoat and a sellout. For like the 87th time in 3 weeks. And again, I reiterate, I don't remember what happens in the story. But from what I'm seeing, the Tatanka thing is very suspect. Like, just the simple fact that he was even there. Like, why the fuck was he conveniently hanging around the corporation's locker room? Just hiding in wait? Expecting Luger was going to show up and confront them? Is that not a little odd? Just saying. I mean, they're doing such an obvious job in getting the people to think that it's Luger who's going to turn. Honestly, if it ends up not being Tatanka at this point, I'll be shocked. I mean, the show is not good, but at least we had that King's Court segment to give us a highlight or two. You know, I kind of talk about the pattern with a lot of these retro Raws. A lot of the segments are bad, but every so often, you get those sprinkles of redeeming content that make the show totally not suck. They are still a few weeks out from SummerSlam, and they've already got basically the entire card announced. If only AEW would have had the same focus to build up to their Wembley show. You know, granted, a lot of the SummerSlam card looks like ass. You know, they got the cage match with Owen and Brett, which is really the only hooking point for me. You know, the $1 Million Corporation stuff is all over the place. The Diesel Razor IC title feud's barely been acknowledged on TV. There's a tag title match they're promoting, which I don't even think ends up happening, if I recall correctly. Luger and Tatanka, we already went over that. And then there's the infamous Taker Catastrophe, which, well, we're going to talk about it. It's been years since I've gone back and rewatched it. The stain it left on me after having seen it the first time or two. Now I'm going to have to be reminded of it. How bad was it truly? Will I have a different perspective going back and witnessing it years later? Probably not. Anyway, on to Collision now. And it was a head-on collision, no doubt. Boy, oh boy. Finally sat down to watch this thing on Sunday night. I had to wrap up a few notes on SummerSlam from the previous night. Didn't get a chance to start watching this show until about 6:45. And then I did watch it. And I was probably better off before seeing it unfold. Nah, to be fair, it wasn't all bad. But I will say, there is a trend that's starting to quickly develop on this show. And whether or not that's a Tony call or Punk just throwing up his hands and saying, fuck it, I tried. He's not going to listen. He's not going to work with me. So I'm just going to take charge with booking my own material and leave him to do his thing. The bottom line is, the show is starting to become the CM Punk FTR versus everything else program. You got the stuff that Punk's involved with, which is usually where the majority of the viewership stems from. And then there's Tony Khan's leftovers, which is basically just Dynamite light. So we can probably call it Dynalite for short. And I understand they were in a tough position this weekend, running opposition to SummerSlam. More than likely, that'll probably hamper the viewership a little bit. So, I get they weren't going to go balls to the walls with a major card this week. But this was like the second or third week in a row where I was kind of in and out for large chunks of the program. I was not glued to the show for the entire 2 hours. And that wasn't the case. For the first month or so, I was watching everything. Just about. But now I'm starting to quickly see a pattern unfold here with the layout of these shows. There are quite a few things that are just not piquing my interest at the moment. Recurring things that we're seeing happen more often than not. And we'll get into them as we run down the card. The opening match with FTR defending the AEW tag belts against Brian Cage and Big Bill was kind of an example of me not being all that interested. Mostly because I'm sitting there wondering to myself, how in the fuck are FTR supposed to work with two big lumbering stiffs like Brian Cage and Big Bill? They're both greener than goose shit. And I don't know if the chemistry was ever all that fitting for FTR to be working this kind of match. Not unless it was going to be one of those Road Warrior Midnight Express type deals where you have the two smaller guys bump and sell for the Giants the entire time. And even in that case, you would run into problems here because the roles were completely reversed. Because FTR weren't the heels. At least I don't think they were. Cage and Bill certainly weren't baby faces. So even the dynamics of that wouldn't have worked. Speaking of the Road Warriors, I do kind of like Cage's new Road Warrior animal-inspired face paint. He's not on that level. Far from it. But it does kind of make him stand out more than he was when he was just a regular green powerhouse guy. Bill, I think, still needs something. If not some kind of face paint deal, new ring gear, something. His name's not helping his cause. Big Bill. Talk about the most generic name you can give a guy. There were moments during this match where I just cringed watching Dax and Cash try to bump for these guys. Like anytime Cage was in there picking up FTR and throwing them around, I winced. Just waiting for him to drop them wrong or fuck something up. And even the spot before the commercial pitch where Bill gave Dax the press slam onto Cash on the floor, even that kind of looked awkward and wonky. Just with the way he let him go. I was afraid Dax was going to come down wrong and land on his ankle or tweak something. I mean, it wasn't a terrible match or anything, but in terms of the work FTR has been doing on the television since they jumped over to Collision, this was clearly the weakest thing they've been involved with. I hated this spot where Cash's wife slapped Bill while he was taunting her at ringside. If not an outright disqualification, she should have been immediately escorted from the building. If we're supposed to buy this shit as real, her just laughing it off and sitting down while Bill has to stand there and pretend to be all fired up, like, that was just totally unnecessary. It was an angle for the sake of doing an angle, added nothing to the match. For my money, I just didn't like the idea of putting FTR in the babyface in peril position. I don't think it worked. It gave Bill and Cage way too much time to be on offense, which is not a good thing. There was some bad miscommunication toward the end where Bill completely fucked up a double clothesline spot. No idea what happened there, but someone blew a call. Brian Cage doing the flipping senton out to the floor was stupid. He's a heel. Why the fuck is he doing that? Should have been fined. And then FTR hit Cage with a big rig like a minute later and won. So the dive spot was utterly pointless and led to nothing, because no one agents AEW matches. Passable TV match, but one of the lesser impressive things I've seen FTR do on the Saturday show. But that was more or less a setup for the promo afterwards, because, well, FTR pretty much laid out the gauntlet. And it's funny. Right as the match was wrapping up, I'm watching FTR basically get a TV win over a set of makeshift singles guys, because, well, point blank, they don't really have many other options at this point. You know, the Adam Cole MJF thing was a one and done. Juice and Jay are occupied with other stuff at the moment. So I was sitting there watching this and I'm like, what really is there for FTR to do right now? Well, we found out. They won the rubber match with the Beta Bucks. And they won it at Wembley Stadium, which is not a bad place to do it. It's kind of interesting how they just laid out the challenge here, matter of fact, on TV. I think the intrigue comes with how the Bucks are going to respond to it. And if and when we actually see that face-off. They basically got 3 weeks to garner up as much excitement for that match as possible. This could certainly be one of the main draws, if they book it right. The problem is they don't have a whole lot of time to do it. So it's kind of crunch time if they're trying to build up some last-minute enthusiasm for it. I mean, it's a hot program because of all the stuff going on with Punk. We're obviously not getting the six-man with Punk and FTR versus the Elite, which could have been a hell of a program. Could have been a big ticket mover if everyone would have just sucked up their hatred for each other and done business professionally. But nevertheless, here we are. Bucks and FTR 3 is certainly better than FTR sitting out the show entirely. I think if they are going to go with it, there is still some intrigue there. And we know there's some actual heat and tension with those guys. Will it make for a better environment? Or is it going to be one of those matches where they go into business for themselves and look for every opportunity to sabotage each other? Either way, I'm interested to see what happens. Hopefully it's a little less wacky than whatever the fuck's going on with Juice, Jay, and the Guns right now. We're edging a little close to goofy territory, guys. I'm all for a little bit of fun and wackiness in wrestling, but this is starting to come off like typical AEW childish antics. The stuff in the back where everybody's heckling Tony, the Guns are being way too over the top and acting like obnoxious 8-year-old children. That all kind of rubbed off on me the wrong way. It's an example of grown men acting like delinquent 8-year-olds. And I already see way too much of that on the Wednesday night show with the Cucamonga cocksuckers. I come to Collision to see grown-ass men. You want to do this kind of shit, go over to Dynamite. So then we went back to the ring for a girls' match. It's Chris Statlander versus Mercedes Martinez for the TBS title. And, well, I know what you're probably thinking. Oh, yeah. Sure, Tommy skipped right over this one like he normally does. Well, in this case, you'd be wrong. Partially, that is. I was watching in passing, sort of a background viewing experience. I know Statlander came back from an injury not that long ago. She just beat Jade Cargill for the belt, and the people gave her a relatively warm reception for the comeback. Mercedes is a solid worker. They've never done anything with her in AEW, but I've seen her in the past. I know she can go. I figured there's no way this could be as bad as that Britt Baker match I watched the other week. So, I periodically checked in while the match was going on. From what I saw, it wasn't horrible. I still don't think the women's matches are doing any favors for the ratings on either program. It's not just exclusive to Dynamite. But this was more or less a pretty basic match. Mercedes did a fine job working over Statlander for the heat. Did a good job working the crowd and trash talking. She at least looks like somebody who could believably kick the shit out of the average person. Statlander made a nice little comeback after the break. The only thing I hated about this was that stupid spot where Mercedes gave Statlander the German suplex throw off the middle rope. Statlander came down and basically landed right on the back of her neck and upper spine. After her laundry list of injuries, the last bump I need to see is Statlander landing on the back of her neck. But, they traded some falls at the end until finally Statlander retained with a bridging roll-up, after which Mercedes beat her up and tried to get some of her heat back. And gotta be honest, this is where I basically skipped ahead, because then you had some girl named Diamante come out, and, well, she just jumped Statlander. Okay. Should I even acknowledge the obvious questions? Who the fuck is Diamante? Where did she come from? Why is she on the show? The palpable questions. Yeah, the afterbirth here was just typical Tony Khan snorting crack in the bathroom kind of booking. Made no fucking sense. Just more of the same Crash TV crap that I would come to expect on Dynamite. And then Samoa Joe killed Serpentico in about 8 seconds. So is that going to be Joe's new gimmick? He just goes around and beats the shit out of all the outlaw mass job guys? I approve. I'm not going to complain about that. It ain't going to get him over as a heel, but fuck it. I don't care. It's exactly what ought to be happening. Hopefully the next victim is Commander. And then we got the best part of the show, hands down. Joe gets on the stick, talks about how he's the true king of television, but we've also got a problem, because we're coming up on this little Wembley show in a little over a few weeks, and the king doesn't have a dance partner. Meanwhile, you got a certain individual walking around proclaiming to be the real world's champion, riding on his high horse, thinking this issue between him and Joe has been resolved. So Joe is officially extending the challenge to CM Punk for All In. For their legacy and their storied history, Joe refuses to let a roll-up be the end of it. But here's the caveat. His challenge only extends through the remainder of the program. Because if Punk does not give him an answer by the end of the night, Joe is going to make sure that he beats the answer out of him. All right, hold on. Wait a minute. Having cue this bad boy up in a little bit, but let's get this going. Yeah. Yeah. Dude. Fuck yeah. What a laser beam promo that was. That's the kind of shit I want to see out of a modern wrestling promo. Believable men with real grudges to settle and making you care about their message. You're trying to tell me you didn't believe Joe by the end of this? Get out of here. This was so great. I love Joe's promos, man. I definitely want to see him do that rematch with Punk. I figured they were going back to the well with that eventually. But, Joe being the one to issue the challenge, that was kind of out of left field. I wasn't expecting that. But there's your other big main event match for the Wembley show. Good. Yeah, that's 2 top card attractions with the FTR match and the Punk match. Throw in the Adam Cole MJF World Title match too. Okay, so now we're making a little headway with this thing. That's what I like seeing. In an ideal world, I would have suggested we maybe start announcing things a lot sooner, but we're getting to that point now. That's good. So then we had this sit down with Tony Schiavone and the Acclaimed. And now they're here to talk about the status of Billy Gunn. After the angle last week where he left his boots in the ring and retired, now we're basically left wondering if it's for real. And I like this. You had Bowens and Caster basically talking about how they talk with Billy, and he pretty much made his intentions clear that he's done. Take that for what it's worth. Whenever a guy teases retirement, but his follow-up is to say, I'm done, throw a warning sign up there. But it was a nice promo. Really put over Billy as a guy that helped lead the Acclaim to success. He was responsible for helping them win the AEW World Tag Team Championships. He was responsible for giving them a platform to become a well-respected team in AEW. And if this is the end for Billy, then they want him to give him one last scissoring session before the end. And the only other thing I noted was, God, it's going to suck when Billy Gunn turns on these guys and fucks them. Because you know where it's going, right? Are we going to pretend like anything else is possible? Unless it's Caster and Bowens that turn on Billy. In that case, it would be stupid. After that babyface promo, they got way too much sympathy. I guess anything's probable, especially with this company. But I like this too. It was tongue-in-cheek, but there was a real sense of credibility to the message. We know these guys are really good friends. They were a hot trio at one point. So it came off as genuine. It wasn't overly phony in the delivery. I was never the biggest fan of the whole scissored me daddy thing. It was just kind of amateur and childish for me, but like I said, for this audience, it worked, and, you actually believe that these guys are friends in real life, so there was an authenticity to it. So I was okay with it. But on the subject of things that are phony, the House of Drek wrestled a trios match this week, and whereas I left the previous girls match on in the background while I was somewhat paying attention, I was not even about to give this the time of day. I'll tolerate a Buddy Matthews match if they take out the other 2 slapnuts, but you put all 3 of them there as a group, I immediately check out. So I did not watch this. I presume the HOD won. Considering they were wrestling job guys, I would expect nothing less. What I did stick around for was the greatest troll segment of all time. And I'll start by saying this. Normally, on general principle, I don't usually approve of wrestlers using their children or just kids in general to try and get segments over. I will make a notable exception to that rule from here on out. For one man, Christian Cage. That man is permitted to use his kid in order to be a heat magnet. God, this guy. He's so fucking good. Every time he's on camera, I'm just glued to whatever's going on. He's such a believable prick. Standing there with his daughter. I presume it's his daughter. I have no other reason to believe otherwise. But, he's talking about how he's a real role model for children. Unlike Darby Allin, who's nothing more than a disreputable piece of human scum. And while he's doing his promo, his daughter tugs on his hand and goes, "Can I hold your belt?" Christian looks down at her with the biggest shit face. And he responds, deadpan, "Did you win this belt?" He's going off on how nobody holds the TNT title except him. And after he tells her to go find her mother, he then yells off camera, "Security! She's not credentialed. I need her removed from the arena immediately." I was moderately pressed for time this weekend. I didn't care. I rewound this promo and watched it back like 6 times. I laughed harder every time I went back to rewatch it. I mean, it's arguable for some people, but, come on. This is easily the best thing Christian's done in AEW, right? I can't think of anything he's done that topped this. And I'm loving the brain-dead dinosaur just standing there in the background taking it. Like, this is so good. I actually seriously forgot that Luchasaurus is the real TNT champion. Christian is so perfect in this role. And, his daughter was cute. She wasn't a big distraction or anything like that. She wasn't a remarkable actress. She's not winning an Emmy, but, she was harmless enough. Just as long as they don't turn it into a Brody Lee Jr. situation where she starts coming out in a dinosaur mask every week, then I'll start to take some issue with it. Back to the ring, though. We get Jay White versus another generic mask jobber. I believe that brings AEW's tally of mask job guys to about 77. I think his name was Metallic? Metalik? Was he... Wait a minute. Was he in WWE at one point? Wasn't he in that Lucha House Party faction a few years ago? Or am I thinking of another set of random mass luchadors? No, in any case. I wasn't all that high on the promo segment with Juice J and the Guns earlier. The Guns being out here on commentary with Riccaboni and Nigel. They weren't overly insufferable. I can't really say I was enjoying their color commentary either, if you know what I mean. Again, I was a big fan of the Juice J versus FTR match. Both of them, in fact. They were both phenomenal TV matches. I don't know if I'm a proponent of all the hokey comedy stuff. And this is where I had some pushback on a lot of those earlier Jay and Juice promos where Juice was just hamming it up on TV and acting way too cartoonish. He's starting to enter that phase again. It's too gimmicky. And my issues with this match go back to what I was saying in that tag match Juice and Jay had on Collision a few weeks ago. Just the idea that it's taking Jay more than 5 minutes to beat a no-name job guy. Did he really need to be selling for Metallic's offense? It's one thing to give a guy a few hope spots, but this should have been like the Joe match. Short, concise, get to the point, Blade Runner, 1, 2, 3. But I guess they needed to make room so the Guns had enough time to act like jackasses on commentary or something. Actually, I'll tell you what my problem is. Watching this unfold, a lot of it just screamed no direction. Like they have zero idea what to do with anybody in this group. Despite the fact that they're even a group, period. I mean, they're on TV, which is good. But Juice and Jay have gone from working the main events with the top guys. Now they're struggling to beat job guys in TV matches in the middle of the show. In less than a month, mind you. That's a pretty quick turnaround if you ask me. And I'm not really sure what this is all being set up for. They're really not doing much in the way of giving me signs of hope that it'll turn out for the better. So again, they need to figure out a direction for these guys. Because this is all just comedy filler at this point. But thankfully, we rounded this one out with the main event. Quality main event, I should add. It's Ricky Starks versus CM Punk. With special guest referee Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Kind of. For some reason. I guess because Ricky's a class act. Steamboat, that is, not Ricky Starks. No, Starks is a dirtbag. We've kind of established that now. And, it's been a while since I've gone back and caught up on my Steamboat footage. In a couple years with these NWA reviews we're doing, yeah, we'll be getting to the Flair Steamboat Classics. 89. Looking forward to those. One of the few redeeming qualities about that god-awful period in the business. But we're here to talk about Punk and Starks, so let's go ahead and run that down. But again, going back to the whole special guest referee thing with Steamboat, can we chalk this one up to false advertising? Was he even really the special guest ref? He was more of an outside enforcer who just so happened to be wearing a referee t-shirt. Because the actual official in the match was Stephon Smith. Basically telegraphing the ref bump before it ever happened. I'm assuming that was done to factor in for the fact that maybe Steamboat wouldn't be able to keep up for a 20-plus minute match. Because, you know, he's old. Which probably begs the question, why did you bring him in to serve as a special guest referee? If you knew he was old and couldn't keep up. All right, so they basically had two referees here. Whatever. It's fine. It's been done before. It's not a newfound concept. Was it necessary for this match? Probably not. You know, except for the last 10 seconds where Steamboat counted the 3 and did his job as a certified official. Beyond that, he was totally useless. In terms of the actual match between Punk and Starks, it was another long haul. When you factor in commercial breaks, I think the whole thing timed out to about 22 minutes overall. And maybe they're subconsciously doing this in order to get Punk's cardio back in check. I don't really know the full reason. But I've talked about how this is kind of a recurring theme with Collision main events where they're basically dedicating the last half hour to the main event. It's worked. 20 minutes is kind of long, but by the end of this, I think they ended up piecing together a relatively solid main event match. No, nothing blow away. It's not going to win match of the year or anything, but a good, solid main event showing for both guys. I was all for the chicken shit stuff where he had Starks bailing out to the floor early on. The deal where they were going back and forth, taunting each other's poses. That was all well and good. Simple and effective storytelling. Again, they're taking their time building up to the big spots. They're not rushing into anything. It's both guys jockeying for position. And as the match continues, they keep cranking up the intensity little by little. They do some angles on the floor where Steamboat's trying to get or be the neutral party to get them back in the ring. What a novel concept in wrestling. Keeping the action between the ropes. Like God fucking intended. Maybe the Dynamite folk ought to take note. And you come back with Punk gaining control. Hit our nice superplex spot. The crowd's eagerly pro-Punk here, so that worked well in their favor. Again, it wasn't the cleanest match ever. There was a pretty bad mishap where both guys mistimed a cross-body dive. I think they were going for the roll-through spot where Ricky would try to do the cross-body attack onto Punk, but then Punk would roll over and try to pin Ricky's shoulders down. Whatever it was, it did not go according to plan. But they stayed on each other. They didn't get lost. They're going back and forth at the end until Punk inadvertently bumps Stefan. And of course that opens the door for Steamboat to get involved. He catches Ricky trying to use his feet on the ropes to pin Punk. And Steamboat wouldn't have any of that. So he swiped Ricky's feet off the ropes. And then while Starks was distracted jaw-jacking with Steamboat, here comes Punk in the back door for a slide roll-up. 1, 2, 3. And you probably expect Starks wasn't going to take too kindly to that loss. So he gets some of his heat back by immediately going after the babyfaces. He blindsides Steamboat, starts wailing away on him, starts beating him with a leather belt. Steamboat's doing a good job selling the agony while Punk's trying to get in the ring and fend him off. Finally, Punk gets in there with a chair, and Starks powders. And they're taking a couple minutes to have the doctors help Steamboat back up. They actually had a great angle here where Ricky Starks tried to run back down to finish off the damage, and Punk goes to give chase up the aisleway, and he took the chair and heaved it as hard as humanly possible toward Ricky. Came within like a hair's reach of napaling poor Ricky in the back of the head. That is one of those run for your life and protect yourself angles, because there's no work in a spot like that. That was do or die. And Ricky narrowly escaped death. But it's great. Keeps the heat on Ricky Starks. Leaves the door open for the Punk Starks thing to continue later on, even if they're going to sidetrack from that and run with the Joe thing. And even better, on the subject of the Samoa Joe angle, we never got clarification from that challenge. He wanted an answer from Punk. We didn't get it. So I'm thinking Punk's going to have a receipt coming his way. Doesn't spell good news for him. Like I noted, the main event was very good. The Steamboat thing, I don't really know if it was needed. It didn't really serve much of a purpose other than just to make Starks look like a dirtbag. And that's fine. I probably could have done without it at the end of the day, but it didn't hurt the program in any way. But I think the main takeaway is that they're putting forth effort into start announcing some of the fucking Wembley card. And it's about time. I said at the top of the report, I'm not a fan of everything I see on the show, and it is starting to become more and more apparent that there's two schools of thought going on right now. You got Punk handling his own material and basically controlling everything there, which is great because it's hands down the best thing on the show most weeks. And the rest of the show has Tony Khan's greasy fingerprints written all over it. You know the stuff that Tony books, because it flashes out on camera like a bad rash. Anything that looks Crash TV oriented, that's all Tony Khan. That girls segment after the Mercedes Statlander match, that was all Tony. You know it. And I'm trying to give this show the benefit of the doubt, because I really want this to be a successful counter program to the Wednesday show. But there's still a lot of material on this program that feels like it belongs on a Dynamite. The House of Drek, some of the talent being featured in the undercard division, the girl stuff. It's a little shaky here right now. There's more talent on this show that I want to see, but the way they're all being used, they're still finding their footing. That's what I can say about it. It's enough for me to say, watch out and be on high alert. Yeah. Well, I think we can establish one thing about the SummerSlam special. Brought to you in part by The Cock. Aside from the fact that I get nothing but technical difficulties every time I try to stream these things, maybe I'm in the minority here. Wouldn't be the first time, won't be the last. See, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without just completely burying the idea of pay-per-view start time. But honestly, I think that's really what the conversation boils down to. It's just one of those things where the older I get, the busier I get, the less patience I have for things. I'm sort of one of those early to bed, early to rise kind of guys. You know, I work out really early in the morning. I usually don't stay up past like 10 o'clock most weekdays because I'm so exhausted by the time I get home from work. I can't physically stay awake past a certain time. And I run into the same problem every time these live specials come up, or just the whole pay-per-view model itself. The 3, 4, 5 hour nightly pay-per-view thing. It's just getting harder and harder for me to stay invested the whole night. And it kind of hinders my enjoyment of the shows. It's been a recurring problem for me for a long time. This is not a new concept. I've just sort of learned to bite the bullet and realize that this is the way pay-per-view models are done in wrestling now. You know, unless WWE is running an international show, the 8 p.m. Eastern start time is just kind of built into the pay-per-view format. And, you know, it was one thing back in the day when traditional pay-per-view was a thing, and the WWF had to actually pay for a certain window to run their pay-per-view feed. Like, you know, if pay-per-views ever ran over the amount of time they bought to host the feed, they would run into problems. WCW ran across that problem running one of their shows in the late 90s. I can't remember. I think it was Halloween Havoc, right? Hogan and Warrior? What year was that? Was it 98, 99? You remember how the pay-per-view feed cut out midway through the main event? And they basically had to re-air the match on Nitro the following night as opposed to giving people their money back? You know, the whole landscape of the streaming services really changed the way wrestling pay-per-views are run now. And it ultimately leads to situations like where we are in 2023, where the shows are way too long and stretched out, things take forever to happen, and by the time the show's over, you know, especially if it's a big show like WrestleMania or SummerSlam, I mean, you're lucky to get to bed before midnight most times. You know, and I talk about the fatigue factor that kicks in once I start approaching that 11:30 to midnight block. I just can't keep myself mentally awake for that length of time. My body's not used to it. It's hard for me to just naturally force myself for 1 or 2 nights a month to just stay up past the normal time I go to bed. So I had a real hard time with the last couple matches on this thing, including the main event, unfortunately. You know, the one story on the show that I've actually been eager to see a payoff for. And by the time we got there, My eyeballs are ready to fall out of my head. I was so goddamn tired. I just hate these 3 to 4 hour trudges. It's so draining. And really, if you think about it, there's no reason why these shows need to realistically trail all the way into the 11:30 or 12 o'clock hour. No reason at all. And I even understand they had to cut a few advertised matches they originally planned for this thing, just to make time. Like the Santos Escobar Austin Theory title match didn't happen. They were both just wedged into that pointless Slim Jim Battle Royal. I think there was a Becky Trish match that got cut. Probably a couple other things on the Raw side that I looked over. To be honest, they probably could have even made time if they would have just cut like 5 to 10 minutes out of that fucking Seth Rollins-Finn Balor match. Or even the opener now that I'm looking back. And the main event. Hate to say it. Because as much as I've been enjoying the Bloodline stuff, that main event started to drag after a while. But I just needed to throw that out there as a caveat before I start running down the card. Because you're going to see as I move through the card here, my energy level completely died by the time we got to that main event. It really did. Not that the length of the show was the only problem. I mean, there were plenty of other issues with this one, including some of the booking. So the opener was Ricochet versus Logan Paul. It's funny. Sometime during the week, I was seeing all these GIFs circulate on YouTube. It's the clip of Ricochet and Logan Paul doing that body collision spot that became like an internet meme. And I remember watching that back thinking, God, I forgot all about that spot. That must have happened ages ago. Do you remember when that spot happened? That was back in January of this year. That was the Royal Rumble. I had totally forgotten about it. You know, I figured that was going to eventually lead to these two working a program at some point. I just didn't think they were going to stretch it out all the way till SummerSlam. And you know, I'll say this. Would this have been my first idea for a Logan Paul feature at SummerSlam? Probably not. I mean, you'll remember right before that Money in the Bank special last month, I was kind of advocating they go in the direction of booking LA Knight versus Logan Paul. I think that program could have garnered a lot more heat and attention. Would have been a more old school grassroots pro wrestling match instead of, well, kind of what I anticipated this match to be. And basically what it ended up being. You know, I've never been the biggest fan of Ricochet in WWE, but he does at least stand out more in this company than he would, say, if he were working in a company like AEW or... I mean, let's be frank, they already have like 200 Ricochets over there. He'd be just another jabroni on that channel. You see him pop in every 5 months to do a job on TV, and then you never see him again. He's definitely a better fit for the WWE machine, even if a lot of his work is more modernized indie. It's not outlaw, let's just put it that way. He's at least a professional. Generally, I would say this is probably the right place on the card to do a match like this. You know, typically your prelim matches serve you better when you send out a couple mid-card athletic guys to work a fast-paced match. You know, keep the crowd on their feet while they're still hot. In terms of what I saw, it was a modern-day moves match. It was all high-impact, big, flashy offense. You know, this one match alone could have probably taken the place of the Raw opening highlight reel. Just one spot after another. It's really difficult for me to rate or judge these matches because, again, the whole thing is just one high-risk spot after another. You know, other than a couple things they did that just looked phony and ridiculous, the Spanish Fly spot being the most notable example, I didn't really have an issue with anything they did. The Spanish Fly spot was just stupid. Not only did they nearly botch it anyway, but it just looked totally choreographed with the way they set it up. With the way they basically had to cooperate with each other to get their footing on the apron before flipping backward onto the floor. Like, that kind of shit is just way too hokey for me to buy. You can do flips and dives in moderation, but still have it not look stagey. That spot just looked scripted and fake. Like, you could tell they were trying to set that up. But that's sort of the key takeaway for me. In moderation, these kinds of matches work in front of hot crowds. And at least here, there was a clear-cut defined babyface and heel that the people were invested in. The problem when we see these kinds of matches in AEW is that there usually isn't a clear-cut face or heel. It's just random guys doing flips and dives for no discernible reason. The other issue is it's flips and dives with guys that aren't over and nobody except the hardcores give a fuck about. Logan Paul's at least a household name. Ricochet, he's more of a name than generic mask guy number 304 on Dynamite. And there was stuff they did in this match that broke up the flow of the gymnastics. Both guys were sort of taunting legends like Hogan and Rock at various points. They did the people's elbow shtick. Logan Paul doing that split-legged drop across Ricochet's throat. Probably one of the more impressive things I saw here was that springboard lariat that Logan did to Ricochet on the floor, where he basically went over the top rope, landed on his feet on the floor, and then clotheslined Ricochet on the outside. I think the only issue is that Ricochet came precariously close to colliding with the ring barricade, so they didn't have a lot of margin for error. But that at least looked visually cool. These guys are great athletes. What more can I say? Like I said, it wouldn't have been my first suggestion for a Logan Paul SummerSlam opponent. Yeah, but at the end of the day, as I look back on it, you kind of needed to give Logan Paul a win. Ricochet taking a fall isn't going to hurt anybody. The whole finish with the brass knuck shot was kind of wonky. Were we just supposed to know who it was that handed Logan the gimmick on the floor? And Michael Cole kept saying it was one of Logan's recording stooges or whatever. Okay, but was he a recurring character on Raw? Was he showing up in Logan's vignettes to where we had any reason to care who he was? How did he get past ring security? That's what I want to know. I don't remember Logan coming down to the ring with anybody. Where'd he come from? The hell is going on there? Yeah, I like the idea of the heat finish with Logan having to cheat by using the gimmick. I just don't think it was set up or explained all that well. And to tell you the truth, Michael Cole kind of summed it up perfectly after the match was over. It was a good match, but the ending sucked. Not kidding, he actually said that. Almost verbatim. Probably one of the funnier things Michael Cole's ever said in his entire illustrious career. And that guy is not known for having a lot of good lines. A lot of ear-piercing lines, but not a lot of good ones. But that at least gives Ricochet an outing, so if they care to revisit this program down the road, they can. Like I said, I just think they felt obligated to give Logan Paul a win since he was already coming off that big loss to Seth at WrestleMania. This at least gave him a little bit of a bounce back mechanism to keep him hot and keep him over as a scumbag heel. So I'm all for that. I definitely think it was placed perfectly on the card, for the kind of match they were going for. It worked for the Detroit crowd. So we go from that to Cody Rhodes versus Brock Lesnar. The rubber match. The feud that's been going on since basically the Raw after Mania once Cody lost to Roman in the main event for the Universal title. This was the final encounter. The blow-off, if you will. Second match on the card. Can you imagine if Dusty and Tully were told, all right, boys, it's Starrcade 86. It's the culmination to the story of Dusty's pursuit to take down the Horsemen and get his revenge. After all that heinous shit the heels put Dusty through, you guys are going second on the card. Behind the girls' matches. Give me a fucking break. If not semi-main eventing the show, this should have outright been the main event, period. I don't care what anybody says. No. Maybe not, considering how tired I was by the time we actually got to the last match. I don't think I would have been able to focus on it. Alright, so now that my griping and bitching is out of the way, let me proceed with the rest of my review of this match. This was fucking awesome. And actually, let me be more specific with that. This was fucking professional wrestling. Real professional wrestling. With actual raw emotion and believable storytelling. And let me just say this before I get into the specifics. I know this kind of match probably wasn't for everybody. Much like how the opener wasn't necessarily my cup of tea. Some people probably enjoyed it more than me. That's fine. But when I look back at this card, and I think to myself, what were the standout highlights? The moments that I could reflect back on and recall what I liked most about the show. A lot of that is going to stem from the Cody Brock match. For the kind of old school wrestling that I prefer, this is about as close as what you're ever going to see in a modern framework. Was it the best match of the year? No. Was it even the best match that Cody's had since he came back to the WWE? Probably not. You know, I would still rank that Cell match with Seth above this one, just judging it off pure emotion and storytelling. But I love the way they laid this out. You know, you've already established these guys hate each other. Cody said that he's going into the show ready for a fight. So he's not waiting for an opening bell to sound. He's not wasting time. As soon as Brock gets in there, Cody's taking charge and going right after him. You know, even though Cody got cut off with a suplex in the opening few seconds, he didn't stay down immediately. He fired right back up, got on Lesnar like bees to honey. You know, for the first few minutes when Cody had Brock staggered, and it's Brock working defense, you know, you're actually starting to wonder to yourself if they're going to take this home in like 2 or 3 minutes and do a Goldberg smash-over deal. Unfortunately, that only really works well for a guy like Goldberg because it's the thing that got him over in the first place. You know, Cody's better at working the underdog sympathetic babyface role. So naturally, Brock cuts off Cody and finds a way to take over, and they basically milk that story for a good period of time. Brock continually dumping Cody out to the floor, telling him to stay down and save himself. And every time Cody refuses to take the count-out loss, Brock gets more and more pissed, more and more aggressive. You know, it starts basic with him kind of shooing Cody out to the floor with his boot. And then after a few cycles of Cody breaking the count and getting back in the ring, that's when Brock finally says, all right, fuck this. He picks up Cody and F5s him through the announce desk. But by the way, sidetrack for a minute here. I might forget to mention this later on, so I'm going to talk about it now. Was there ever an explanation for how, after doing the broken announce table spot here with Brock and Cody, by the time they get to the next match, the announcer's table is just right back up in its normal spot like nothing ever happened? There's no rubble in the surrounding area, no broken glass or monitors. I don't even think anybody mentioned it. It was like those WWF breakaway toy table gimmicks that would come with the action figures back in the day, where you could just reassemble the table by clicking the two pieces together. Thought that was funny. But, finally, after Brock spends a few minutes beating Cody down and, they're showing that glassy eye look on him, swinging his fists around, not really knowing where he is, Eventually, Cody's able to muster up the ability to fight back. He posts Lesnar on the floor right as he's trying to set him up for an F5 on the ring steps. And that's Cody's opening to start making the comeback. I did write as a joke here, the John Cena no-sell comeback. That's basically what it was. And he's doing all his signature moves. Still not a fan of the Cody Cutter, the move or the name. But yeah, people like it, so guess you can't fault him for it. But of course, Brock catches him in the Kimura for a minute. And I forget when. Somewhere during this, Cody ripped off the top turnbuckle again. And I was kind of expecting that they were going to do another hardway juice job with Brock, like what happened in their previous encounter. Whichever match that was, where Brock posted himself for real and gashed open his forehead. But they didn't do that this time. Instead, Brock sort of ran arm and shoulder first into the exposed buckle so Cody could lock him in the Kimura. And somehow that got broken up. I think Brock may have gotten a rope break. A little hairy on the details once we started getting to the finish. Then Cody just turned it into a series of crossroads and got the clean pin. One of the few times you actually see Brock do a clean job, so take that for what it's worth. I was almost expecting them to just have Cody flat out beat Brock with his own submission finish. You want to talk about giving the guy a stamp of approval. But now they did the pinfall finish instead. Yeah, it got a little dicey there too with the finish. I was starting to wonder if this was going to end up turning into an impromptu strip match. The fuck was going on with Brock's torn ring trunks? One more tear in the fabric and that would have been more of Brock Lesnar than I ever needed to see. I think even Cody was breaking character a little bit after he won with the Crossroads. He's looking down and seeing Brock's shorts basically torn all the way up to his crotch, and he's like, that's a little too much exposure there, brother. Brock taking the meaning of half-naked, sweaty men rolling around on each other a little too seriously. All kidding aside, though, I was a little iffy on the handshake hug thing after the bell. I didn't hate it. It kind of killed Brock Lesnar's mystique. Now even he's going around hugging people and selling out for the pussy show of respect. I don't know. They couldn't just wait until Raw the following night to do that. They had to do it right then and there. Minutes after Brock spent the entire match beating the shit out of this guy and trying to break his arm. F5ing him through the announce table. Now he's standing there 10 minutes later and kissing Cody on the cheek. Ugh. There's a time and a place to do stuff like that in wrestling. This wasn't it. Not after a heated grudge match, which is basically what this was. Or at least that's what they were advertising it as. But what's done is done. Cody wins, presumably putting this feud to a close. Temporarily. Could they revisit it down the road? Sure. I think it would probably serve them better to maybe hold off until Cody's the champion, so, gives them something to actually fight over. Because up until this point, the feud's mostly been about bragging rights, right? It's kind of just been a placeholder thing for Cody to do while he's not occupied with the world title chase. And that's fine, nothing wrong with it. They still got plenty of time before we get to the Royal Rumble. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with him in the fall, especially as we approach Survivor Series. The thing with Cody is that you obviously want to protect him. If the game plan is still to run with him to challenge Roman again at WrestleMania next year, you don't want to keep risking him getting hurt. But at the same time, they still got a long road between now and WrestleMania. In the short term, you don't really have a lot of top names right now that he can throw at Cody to work a program with. Now that the Brock thing is done, what now? I know the Judgment Day is kind of a hot thing on Raw, so you can always consider programming Cody in with them. Maybe that'll be the Survivor Series match. Him captaining a team against Damian, Balor, Dom, and... I was going to say Rhea, but maybe not Rhea. Not unless Cody's entire team consists of job guys under 200 pounds. They can always find another heel to serve as an interim Judgment Day member. I know they got the thing going on with Finn Balor right now. Him and Priest were teasing some dissension during that world title match later on, so maybe that would be the appropriate time to have those guys turn on each other and do the breakup in November. I'm obviously just spitballing ideas. I don't work for the creative team, so don't take anything I say literally. They're all possibilities of what they could do. But yeah, great match. Great series closer. One of the better Brock Lesnar matches I've seen in a very long time. And I've been very outspoken on this channel about how down I've been on Brock for a long time in this company. This was one of his better showings. So then we came to what I basically coined in my notes, the Geek Battle Royal. Taking a bunch of underneath guys, sprinkling the occasional name here and there, and booking them on the card because I guess they felt bad for some of the guys that didn't get a pay-per-view payout. And of course, the whole thing's a formality. There were only like 3 or 4 names that you could actually envision winning. And if it wasn't LA Knight, the people in Detroit would have fucking rioted. I was just kind of waiting to see if Omos could actually take a bump over the top rope without breaking his ankle or shattering an ACL. It would seem he lucked out of pulling a Sid Vicious here. You know, it sucks seeing guys like Tommaso Ciampa just kind of get dumped out like an ordinary dweeb. Now, of course, that was me just casually walking by the TV and seeing it happen. If I actually took the time to write down all the names in this thing, I probably could say the same about a lot of people in this match. But yeah, I was sort of in and out while this was going on. I'm not a fan of Battle Royals. I'm really not a fan of Battle Royals that are literally just shoehorned on the show with nothing on the line. Except for product placement because WWE needs to please the advertisers. But again, I go back to what I said a minute ago. LA Knight needed this win. He was the only super over guy in the entire match. He was one of the 3 or so guys that actually got an entrance. So he at least knew he was important. And when he dumped Sheamus at the very end, God, it may as well have been him winning the fucking Royal Rumble. This is the most damning thing in the world. Think about how ludicrous this all is. The people went fucking ballistic for LA Knight winning a completely meaningless battle royal with nothing on the line. They didn't give a shit about whether or not the battle royal had stakes. They just wanted to see LA Knight win a fucking big match. That's how over this guy is right now. It's astonishing. And I would just wait and see what they actually do with it. Okay, so LA Knight won a Battle Royal on the SummerSlam card. Great. It's probably a cool moment for him. But what are you going to do with that momentum? Are you just going to go back to having him be a regular guy on SmackDown? Keep jerking him around with the people and never do anything with him? Discount the occasional bone you throw him whenever you decide to give him a random TV win? I mean, that's going to be the key component to all this. The follow-up. Or lack thereof. Jury's still out. Guess we'll see. So after that came the Ronda Rousey Shayna Baszler MMA rules match. And, ouch. Yeah, this shit didn't get over, did it? Now I remember why I can never really get into mixed martial arts. That shit's boring as fuck. And that was when I was watching the guys do it. Yeah. This about sucked. Can't really say much more than that. I mean, I didn't even know the MMA rule stipulation was a thing until Ronda started making her entrance. I knew we were getting the match. When did they add the MMA rules thing? Was that a last-minute throw-in to try and hook some interest? I don't know, man. But, yeah, this whole thing was just a total failure. In a weird, almost kind of fitting way. How telling is it that this was probably Ronda's last match in WWE? And not only were the fans completely silent for more than 80% of it, there were audible, "This is boring" chants. Kind of sums up Ronda's entire WWE run, doesn't it? Boring, lifeless, and it sucked. And you know, to be frank, if this was Ronda's last match in WWE, good. It's obvious she never really had a passion for this anyway. At this point, she's just collecting a paycheck. Her second run was crummier than the first. She doesn't add any value to the overall product. She's not a needle mover. That's apparent. So yeah, just cut the cord and be done with it. Let her move on to pursue other passions and stop having her clutter up the ring with her shitty matches. I mean, I never understood what the big deal was with her to begin with. I mean, she peaked during that debut match at WrestleMania a few years ago, and she wasn't even really the highlight of that match. But there you have it. Didn't work. This just didn't work. So after that abomination that completely killed the crowd, that basically left poor Gunther and Drew McIntyre to go out there and try to bring the people back to life. Talk about an unfortunate position after they were lulled into a coma with that hideous MMA debacle. I mean, for me, that was the least of my worries by the time we got to this point. I don't know if anybody else was experiencing the same thing, but I had some serious buffering issues midway through this match. Constant skipping and freezing like every 8 seconds. It was so goddamn annoying. It's amazing how shitty this fucking streaming service is. You literally cannot watch any show live without something going haywire. Every time. Every fucking time I run into this problem. Where I have to open and close the app like 3 times during a match. I was so pissed. Fuck Peacock. I have easier times watching AEW pay-per-views on Bush League streaming sites. Ridiculous. So that kind of hindered my enjoyment of this match. And the people were chanting, "This is awesome." So clearly I was missing all the good stuff while Peacock decided to be a garbage streaming service for about 5 minutes. Maybe I just need to go back and try to watch it again without all the buffering issues. Give it a second chance. I do appreciate how WWE is going all in with trying to have Gunther top the Honky Tonk Man's IC title reign. They're just destined to erase all their history, aren't they? All that 70s and 80s history is outdated, man. Time to shake it up a bit. Now every world champion in WWE needs to have the longest title reign of whatever belt they're currently carrying. Whether that's Roman in the Universal title, Gunther in the IC title. I guess they kind of steamrolled over Bianca's title reign when they hot-shotted it over to Asuka for no discernible reason. Anyway, so I caught up with this about midway through. Again, it's hard for me to critique it because I had such a hard time even watching it. I guess for me, you know, I was thinking about it during this match. I don't know if, again, maybe I'm just one of those critical thinkers that has to overanalyze everything and think about ways to improve something that's just not clicking right. Drew McIntyre, for me, is one of those talents in WWE that's always been missing something. You know, he's got a lot of upside as a talent, but it's kind of like the Karrion Kross dilemma. He's got a lot of the tools, but I don't think he's found a way to take all those tools and create a foundation for himself. You know what I mean? Like, he's got the size. He's a pretty charismatic guy. He can talk. He can work. But, I'm always wanting something more with him. And I don't think I've ever gotten that with Drew in WWE. Is it just the problem that he doesn't have the ultimate it factor? Could be. Is it the issue of him being around for a while and coming off as kind of stale? How long has Drew been a babyface? It's been a couple years, right? You know, the moment I saw him take the fall here to Gunther, essentially clean, that's when I was starting to reroute my brain a little bit and think, maybe they ought to reconsider him as a babyface. Maybe a heel turn is exactly what he needs. Here's the other thing you have to keep in mind with Drew. He really hasn't been red hot since the program with Roman and Cardiff last year. They kept him as a babyface since, but what's it really doing for him? He's kind of stagnant, at least in his current role. And I've seen Drew have a heel run before. I know he can work that side of the aisle. Maybe it goes against the grain of WWE's mission to try and have a babyface representative for the UK market. It's not like WWE doesn't have plenty of UK talents at their disposal. Like, does it have to be Drew that holds that position? Sheamus is a marketable babyface for the UK market. Finn Balor is if they turn him babyface again. I'm thinking of ways they could change it up a bit to make Drew a little more interesting. Because like I said, he's a great talent. But they've sort of run the course with him as a babyface. And I'm wondering if they're actually doing him a disservice by continuing to run that gauntlet. I think it's doing more harm than good. Maybe turning Drew heel is the exact thing he needs. And you know, if it doesn't get over, you can always flip him back. But that also gives Seth the new guy to feud with on Raw for the title, if he's going to stay a babyface. Not that I have any fucking clue what Seth's gimmick is. But that was sort of my main takeaway from all this. For what I saw, I liked the match. I wish I could watch it when the fucking Peacock Network decides to actually run things properly, but them's the breaks. But I just think Drew McIntyre needs a bit of a character change up. But maybe that's just me. So then we come to Finn Balor and Seth Rollins for the World Heavyweight title. The SummerSlam rematch, 7 years in the making. After the first incident where Rollins powerbombed Balor into the ring barricade and separated his shoulder. It's crazy how I still remember that. To this day. It was like right around the point where Balor was his hottest in the WWE too. And after that injury, Vince never gave him a second chance. He was banished into mid-card purgatory from then on. Poor guy. So, well, here we are. In the post-Vince McMahon era, I guess you could say. 7 years. And to make sure that we all remember the nostalgia of that first match, Seth came out wearing, I guess, the vest that he apparently wore during the initial match. It was a little snug around the body, if you catch my drift. And of course, I would be remiss. It's a Seth Rollins match, so I must take the opportunity to do my monthly sing-along of the worst theme song in WWE history. Here we go. Not even going to warm up. We're just going to dive right in. Burn it down. Burn that music down. Fuck. Song's obnoxious. Is that a Jim Johnson original? Or is that after his time? Whoever composed that wretched trash, I hope they got their composition degree taken away. Anyway, there was a lot to unpack here. Especially once we got to the last 5 or so minutes where it was just overbooking out the ass. I'll start with this. Regardless of whether or not I'm into the whole Seth Rollins gimmick, the guy's obviously a talented worker. He knows what he's doing. Balor, same kind of deal. I still kind of fart at the idea of the secondary world champion on Raw. It's totally invalidated so much of what they've done to try and establish Roman as the guy. Like, he's obviously the number one champion, but having Seth as a world champion on Raw, do you really need it? Why not just have Gunther as the top champion on Raw? I mean, he's already about to top the Honky Tonk Man's record as the longest reigning IC champion. At least you know his title reign isn't a joke. So just run with it. Make Gunther the top champion on Raw that everybody's trying to go after. I don't get it. Having 2 world champions again, it's such a WWE thing to do. When it comes to the work in the match, the best I can probably say is that it was a main event style modern WWE match. A lot of high impact big moves, a lot of kickouts. I think time-wise, it may have gone a little too long for my liking. I was already starting to get a little drained by the time we got to this match anyway. More than halfway through it, I was about ready to doze off. The excessive false finishes and overbooking with the Judgment Day is what kind of killed it for me. I know we live in the age of wrestling now where the whole excitement factor of a match is heavily dependent on how many kickouts a guy does. You know, but when it gets to the point where both guys are completely burying the other guy's finish, that's where I start to kind of push back a little bit. Like, I don't know. Did we really need all the WrestleMania false finishes in a second-tier title match that didn't even main event the fucking pay-per-view? Isn't that overkill? You know, like the spot where after Seth takes out Dom and Priest with a flurry of dives, he gets back in the ring, is immediately cut off by Balor so he can hit him with a sling blade, a corner drop kick, and a coup de grace. All of that shit. And Seth still has to kick out at 2. Really? And, you know, as far as the whole Judgment Day thing goes, they basically had the story going where Priest would try to feed or pass the briefcase to Balor so he could use it. But then Balor would either get pissed or, you know, he'd get cut off somehow because Priest would get taken out by Rollins. Then you had Dom and Rhea getting involved. And again, maybe it's just my natural instincts of watching territorial wrestling for so much of my young adult life. But when you've got all this shit happening at ringside with tons of interference, tons of people running in and causing havoc behind the ref's back, and yet they're just still casually hanging out at ringside while the referee's standing around letting it happen, why isn't the ref ejecting people? Why is nothing ever a rush or urgent matter? If you're a heel interfering in a match, why would you try to interfere at one point, get cut off, and then just stand around for a few minutes to wait for another opportunity to strike? This happened like 3 times where Priest is trying to look for an opening to run a distraction spot or hand the briefcase over to Balor, and then something would happen to where his plan would fall through, but the ref never does anything about it. He admonishes him. He yells at him to get down from the ring apron. But that's it. He just lets everybody hang out at ringside. It's like, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Fool me 3 times. Can we just get a fucking agent that knows how to book a goddamn match? It was just incredibly distracting. That's all it was. And moreover, did anybody actually buy that Rollins was going to lose? Moreover, I think that's why I got more antsy toward the finish. Because once Balor and Priest started arguing, getting into it, I mean, I knew Rollins was going to go over. But then they just kept doing shit for like 3 or 4 minutes, and I was losing patience. Finally, they have Priest toss the gimmick in the ring, immediately jump on the apron to distract the ref yet again. And then right as Balor went to pick up the briefcase, Rollins runs over and gives him the curb stomp and then pins him. Which then begs the question, if Balor was going to use the gimmick anyway, why did he just spend the previous 2 minutes arguing with Priest over not using the briefcase? Again, I reiterate, can we get an agent with a clue? Jesus Christ. How hard is this? Seriously. Never worked in the business a day in my life, and I can lay out a better match than these clowns. I don't know. I was salty by this point. There were a few good things that happened here, but the overbooking just kind of killed it for me. Took me out of it by the end. Obviously, you kind of see them planting the seeds for the Judgment Day split. Where and how that comes, I don't entirely know. But at least we're eventually going to move past that. The Judgment Day experiment, I've kind of done my rant about that. It's another faction that's run its course and kind of needs to disband ASAP. Get Priest out of there, move him on to something else. Let Rhea and Dom break off as a duo and do their own thing, and Balor can sort of meander around and not be involved. Hate to say it. So then we had the 3-way for one of the girls' titles. I guess the one that Rhea's not currently holding. So whatever they're calling that belt these days. It's Charlotte versus Asuka versus Bianca. The match where I actually went in forgetting who the champion was. That's how horrible this feud's been built up on SmackDown. It was Asuka, for the record. And you know, I've already been pretty outspoken about my hatred for multi-person matches in wrestling anymore. I'm a broken record trying to rant about it again. With that said, WWE does have a tendency to be able to occasionally put together some okay 3-ways whenever the situation is right. You know, they just did one at WrestleMania this past year with Gunther, Sheamus, and Drew McIntyre, so they can do it. But this 3-way was not one of those matches. Again, it was the timing of where it was on the show. Hate to say it, call me a misogynist, but it's probably the fact that it was a girls' match. The fact that Charlotte was involved. I really didn't like the idea of them booking this on paper. Now that I've seen it, well, now I know why I was kind of down on it. I think my favorite spot in the next chapter of my novel entitled Reasons Why Charlotte Flair is the Most Overrated Female Wrestler of All Time. Go ahead and write this one down for historical purposes. The botch of the century, where Charlotte had to pause her comeback to have Jessica Carr, the official, help to adjust her fucking top because the zipper was slipping down. So, while Asuka and Bianca are hunched over in the corner, literally leaning up against each other for a fucking hour while Charlotte is playing around with her top. Made all three of them look like idiots. Bianca and Asuka for having to stand there and pretend like they were glued together in the corner. Meanwhile, Charlotte finally gets her top zipped up. And then she follows it with the worst running clothesline in the corner of all time. God, she is fucking rotten. Why do people like her? She is horrible. Every fucking Charlotte match I ever see, she screws everything up. Every match. And it's her fault. She's just so jerky and stiff. Everything she does, it looks so amateurish. She missed her moonsault dive out to the floor. No surprise there. She always fucks that up. I'm not even going to acknowledge whatever the hell that spot was where Asuka tried to give her a DDT from the top rope and then Charlotte basically did a handstand bump onto her head. My God. The whole thing. I just chalk it up to another case of Charlotte needlessly intervening in programs and matches that she has no business being a part of. Because all she does is detract from it. Every time. And really, when you look back at it, take my opinion out of the equation, was Charlotte really needed in this match? What did she contribute? She didn't take the fall. There was no need for her to be in this match. Her role was pointless. The story of the match was all about the injury angle they were working with Bianca. And that was honestly the best part. Just the way she believably sold all that. You know, the bump she took over the top rope where she collided with the ring steps and then immediately came up grabbing her knee and screaming. That shit looked authentic. It's like Bianca actually suffered some legit injuries in her life to where she knows what pain naturally feels like. So she's able to realistically sell it on camera. And you know, not to crap on everything about the match, the finish was kind of clever. I'll definitely give him points for coming up with a creative finish. You know, the missed spot to Charlotte while she had Bianca in the figure eight, and then right as Asuka goes to cover Bianca, she gets caught in a small package and pinned, while Charlotte still had Bianca's legs hooked. I mean, I didn't really dig the match, but points for a good finish. And then, of course, immediately afterwards, you knew with Bianca going over and still selling a leg, that was going to be the opportune moment for Io Sky to run out and cash in Money in the Bank. Sure enough, right on cue. It's exactly what happened. Not a moment too soon. And you know, it is kind of comedic to think that the heel cash-in spot in wrestling now is just a way to get the initial babyface pop when the person runs down to cash in the contract. Like, it doesn't get heat. You ever notice that? It's like as soon as Io's music hit, the people blew a gasket. And then when she hit Bianca with the moonsault and won, they popped even louder. So yeah, the heel cheated and fucked over the babyface. Yet she got the biggest pop of the entire show. That's modern wrestling logic for you. You know, it sucks they basically used Bianca as a plot device to immediately take the belt off of her and put it on Io in the chicken shit cash-in spot. But, you know, maybe that'll give her more incentive to consider flipping heel, which I've been advocating for. But that's what I got out of it. Charlotte sucks. Asuka was just a meaningless placeholder champion for all of like 2 months. And Bianca going over just to lose the belt to Io Sky seconds later in a bullshit cash-in. So they all got fucked. That was basically the moral to the story. So then we finally get to the main event. Main event Jey Uso. More specifically. Still not sticking. My God. Speaking of getting fucked. I was about there by the time this match started. Fucking tired is what I was. Almost punch drunk in a way. Now, the real main event of SummerSlam this year, it was me versus sleep deprivation. We'll consider this one a time limit draw. For the Universal title, it's Roman Reigns versus Jey Uso. Tribal Combat, which is just a lazy booking way of them saying it's no DQ, anything goes. Oh, more stuff I actually forgot about. The fact that these two actually already wrestled previously. I had completely forgotten about that. The Hell in a Cell match from like 2 years ago, before the Bloodline was ever actually formed. Didn't we review that pay-per-view on the channel? Man. Stuff really does start to blend together after a while, doesn't it? Or maybe I'm just getting senile. No. Regardless. Remember how I kept joking about how the main event Jey Uso thing was probably only temporary? Well, I don't think they were joking. This was a rough match to watch. You know, I was already kind of shaky on the whole no DQ stipulation. I already figured that if A, we weren't going to have tons of interference by the end of it, B, it would just wind up turning into another modern day furniture match. It's more or less what it was. You know, toned down in comparison to AEW. But that's pretty much what the entire match was. It was a plunder match. They used tables, chairs, kendo sticks. Pretty much all the modern prop hardware you'd come to expect. Yeah, they tried at various points to get you to buy the idea that Jey could somehow go over, but man, even for the Detroit crowd, I don't think they ever got to that point. Maybe toward the finish, right when Jey sidestepped and Roman accidentally speared Solo, and then Jey capitalized and hit Roman with the spear, the people popped for that false finish. But I don't know if there was ever any drama here like there was for the match with Cody or, man, even Sammy back in Montreal. That had tons more heat than this match. Yeah, different crowd, different environment, sure. But I don't think Jey ever got to that level as a believable top babyface. You know, even with all the effort they put in to try to get him to that point. You know, by the time they had Solo run out and blatantly start interfering on behalf of Roman, yeah, we're basically right back to the same talking point I discussed with the Balor-Rollins match. The problem I had there, where it's just constant run-ins for like a 5-minute period, and you're just wondering, like, where the fuck is everybody? Where are some of the baby faces to run off Solo? Where were Sammy and Kevin? They should still have a beef with Solo, right? Where were they to save the day and fight on behalf of Jey Uso? At least that would have gone a monster pop. And we at least know that Jey and Sammy are still good friends. But no, Solo's just out there working a glorified handicap match on behalf of Roman. No, like I said, they eventually paid it off when Roman inadvertently speared Solo and then Jey capitalized with a spear and a splash. Only got a 2 count, obviously. You know, they kept doing stuff for a few more minutes until finally Jey ends up spearing Roman through the ring barricade. Because they got to do that spot in every fucking main event match. It's the most overdone spot in WWE. We see it on like every live special. And then Jey ends up giving Solo the splash to the announcer's table. So that's 2 announcer table spots in one show to the same table. Great. And then after Jey throws Roman back into the ring, he hits him with another spear, goes up top for the big splash. 1, 2, and then Jey gets pulled out by his leg. There's a man standing under a black hood. Surprise, surprise. It's Jimmy. And they do this long, over-dramatic stare down where Jimmy's looking at Jay. Jay's on his knees, basically motionless. Time freezes. Days go by. The sun rises. The moon falls. Everybody's still in the same stationary position. Until finally, Jimmy just super kicks him in the face. Throws Jay back in the ring. And then Roman just spears Jay through a table and pins him. I wish I had a popcorn fart sound effect. That was, That was kind of lame. I mean, I was even kind of at a loss for words when this finish came around. Not because I was surprised Jay lost, but really? That was your big swerve? Jimmy Uso realigning with the bloodline? After we've already sort of closed the chapter on that part of the story? Now he's just back with Roman and Solo like none of that previous shit ever happened? Like we didn't just see Solo and Roman put this guy in a hospital? Like we didn't just see Jimmy Uso super kick Roman in broad daylight right before Jay ever had the balls to do it? Until finally Jay mustered up the ability to kick Roman in the face on SmackDown? Like, what the fuck's going on here? Who's writing the story now? Russo? What's the explanation supposed to be? That Jimmy thought twice about it and realized that it would be better to serve as Roman's right-hand man? Haven't we already surpassed that part of the story? I mean, this is just retreading old ground. This was basically them doing a swerve for the sake of doing a stupid swerve. Didn't make a lick of sense in the scope of everything they've been doing on television. And now we're right back to the same drawing board. Roman's got the clan back together. Minus Jay. And now what? You're setting up a Jimmy versus Jay match for the next premium live special? Is that going to be the main event? Do people actually want to see that? All respect to the Usos, but come on now, right? Really? I don't want to see that. Because what's the end game? What do we get out of it? Unless this is all leading to some kind of Survivor Series elimination match. Or maybe a War Games match. Maybe you do like Team Jay versus Team Roman. You got Roman, Jimmy, and Solo versus Jay and... I don't know. Maybe Sammy and KO. But are we really going to go back to the well with that again? We've already seen the Sammy Owens versus Bloodline pairing. It's not anything new. And that's really what frustrated me the most about the way they booked this finish. Not only was it the wrong kind of heat finish, it's not developing the story in a new, creative way. We're just right back to where we started with Roman at the helm, Solo as the muscle, and Jimmy as the background flunky. And again, after all that, everything they did to separate the Usos from the equation, to get them to stand out on their own as a babyface unit, going up against Roman and Solo, this is like the last fucking thing they needed to do. was realign Jimmy with Roman. I understand Roman kind of sold it like he was confused, like he didn't really know what was going on here. This wasn't really part of the plan, whatever. I don't know. I just didn't like this. And the match really didn't work for me. This was probably one of the lowest points in the Bloodline saga, if I'm being honest. I came out of this with that disgusted heat mentality. It's not a good thing. That's not me wanting to see Jimmy get his ass kicked for betraying Jay and costing him the title. That's me hating the idea of where this is all going in story because I'm kind of getting sick of the Bloodline thing at this point. Because now it's not going anywhere constructive. We're not really building or developing anything now. Now it's just kind of in a delay period. And they still got a lot of time between now and Mania. At some point, this faction's got to blow up. And I think they're kind of testing a lot of people's patience with how long they can really drag this out. Reasonably drag it out. There's a long-term effect of storytelling in professional wrestling where the people will stay with you because they really want to see what the end goal is. And then there's stuff like this where you're just dragging it out. That's what it is. They're dragging their feet with it. It's starting to become more and more apparent that maybe there really isn't an end game in mind for this group. Maybe they really don't have this thought out all that well. There's been a lot of twists and turns in the story, but I think the reality is starting to come in now that they might not have this planned out. So they gotta course correct. They gotta figure out where the fuck this is going and get to the point. Because again, that's kind of where I am now. I'm sort of over it. Which kind of put into perspective my issues with the show overall. Aside from it being way too long, I just didn't really come out of it excited to see where anything goes. Even the Bloodline payoff, that was a major misstep. There was a lot of stuff that just didn't hit home right. It wasn't even that it was a bad show. It was just disappointing. I didn't really have that high of expectations going in, but I expected a little better than what we got. Cody and Brock was the highlight for me. Then it kind of trickled off from then on. Really starting with that Ronda Rousey segment. Good God, that was fucking horrible. And I don't think the show ever really recovered afterwards. At least for me, it didn't. So there's your long-winded SummerSlam recap. Maybe I'm just a bitter old man at this point, but something about that show it was off. That was my mentality coming out of it. But that's all right, because we're just on to the next one, Got plenty of other wrestling to talk about. SummerSlam is far from the worst thing I've seen all year. Good Lord. Could take that conversation in a million different directions. But why don't we go ahead and wrap this one up? Thanks everybody for tuning in. As always, you can feel free to chime in and share your thoughts on the show if you watched it. I'd love to hear your feedback if anybody else had issues with the streaming service. God, Peacock is just a nightmare to run. But I'll catch you guys on Friday for the Dynamite Report and the continuation of our retro review series. Onward and forward to the fall as summer comes to a close, and before you know it, the new year will be kicking in. So take care, all. Peace out.